I was folding towels in the Carmichael's laundry room when their baby monitor went completely silent. Not the normal kind of quiet, the kind that feels wrong. Their son, Oliver, was 14 months old, and he never stopped making noise during naps. He'd babble to himself, shift around, sing these little wordless songs. There was always something. I set down the towel and walked toward the kitchen where I'd left the monitor. The house had that specific afternoon stillness that happens in new developments. Every neighbor at work, every driveway, empty. Just me and a sleeping baby in a house that was too big for the people living in it. I'd been watching Oliver twice a week for 8 months. The Carmichaels were easy work. They paid in cash at the end of every session. They left detailed notes about his schedule. They never made things weird. I was 23 and trying to save enough to move out of my parents' house, and this job was steady income. The kind where nothing ever goes wrong and you just show up and do your hours and leave. The monitor was where I left it, but the screen was black. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I tried the volume. Still nothing. The battery was full when I checked it an hour ago. I'd have to go upstairs and see what was happening. I climbed the stairs slowly and listened for any sound from his room. The hallway felt darker than it should have been for 2 in the afternoon. Nobody had closed any curtains. I hadn't touched the blinds. His door was open exactly the way I'd left it. Wide enough to hear him, but not so much that hallway noise would wake him up. Mrs. Carmichael showed me that specific angle, my first day. I pushed it open further and stepped inside. Oliver was in his crib, sleeping on his back, breathing normally. Everything looked fine. Then I noticed the window. It was open, not all the way. Maybe 4 inches, enough to let cold air pour into the room. I never opened windows during naps. Mrs. Carmichael's instruction sheet specifically said not to because Oliver would wake up if the temperature dropped. I walked over and closed it. The lock was stiff, like it hadn't been used in months, but it was definitely open 30 seconds ago. I could still feel the cold air. I checked the rest of the room. His toys were where I'd left them. His books were stacked on the shelf. Nothing else looked disturbed. Oliver's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe Mrs. Carmichael had opened it before she left and forgot to mention it. Maybe I was remembering the instructions wrong. I left the room and went back downstairs. I tried the monitor again. This time it turned on. Oliver's room appeared on the screen. He was still asleep. Still fine. I went back to folding laundry, but I kept glancing at the monitor. Every few minutes I'd look. Oliver didn't move. At 3:40 he woke up fussing and I went to get him. His diaper had leaked and his sleep sack was damp. I changed him and brought him downstairs. He was cranky, rubbing his eyes, pulling at my hair. I made him a snack and put on his favorite show, but he didn't want to sit. He just wanted to be held. He kept staring at the stairs. Not a quick look, a real stare, fixed on the empty hallway at the top. I asked him what he was looking at. He pointed with one chubby finger and said something that sounded like man. He was just starting to use a few real words, but most of it was still sounds and babble. I felt something cold move through my chest. I kept my voice light and asked him what man. He pointed again, more insistent, and said, up. I told myself he meant his dad. He'd seen Mr. Carmichael that morning. He was confused about where his parents went. I pulled him closer and watched the stairs while his show played. Nothing moved. Nobody appeared. At 5:15, Mrs. Carmichael came home and Oliver reached for her immediately. She asked how everything went and I said fine. I didn't mention the window. I didn't mention what Oliver said. I took my money and left. I came back 2 days later. Same time, same routine. Mrs. Carmichael left at 1. I gave Oliver lunch and put him down for his nap at 1:30. Before I went back downstairs, I checked every window in the house. Every single one. All locked. I even checked the sliding door to the back patio. I felt stupid doing it, but I needed to know. The monitor stayed on. Oliver stayed asleep. I was wiping down the kitchen counters when I heard something from upstairs. Not from the monitor, from the actual house. A soft thump, like something being set down carefully. I turned off the faucet and listened. Silence. I looked at the monitor. Oliver hadn't moved. I waited a full minute. Nothing. I told myself it was the house settling. Except this house was only 3 years old. New construction doesn't make those sounds. I went back to cleaning, but every small noise made me stop. At 2:40, I heard it again. This time it sounded like footsteps. Deliberate. Moving across the upstairs hallway. I put down the sponge and walked to the bottom of the stairs. I called out, asking if anyone was home. My voice came out thin and uncertain. Nobody answered. I thought about calling Mrs. Carmichael, but what would I even say? I heard a sound. She'd think I was flaky, unreliable. I needed this job. I made myself climb the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. The hallway was empty. Oliver's door was still open the right amount. I checked his room first. Sound asleep. Window locked. I checked the master bedroom. Empty. The guest room. Empty. The bathroom. Nothing. I was about to go back downstairs when I saw that the linen closet door was open. It had been closed when I checked the windows. I pulled it open all the way. Towels. Extra sheets. Toilet paper. Nothing that shouldn't be there. I closed it hard enough to hear it latch and went back downstairs. My hands were shaking for no reason I could name. Nothing had happened. Nobody was there. I was scaring myself over sounds that probably had normal explanations. I sat on the couch and stared at the monitor until Oliver woke up at 4. He was happy when I got him. Playful. We stacked blocks and read books, and everything felt normal again. When Mrs. Carmichael came home, I smiled and said it had been a great afternoon. The third time I came to babysit, Mrs. Carmichael mentioned their alarm system had been acting up. Random beeps at weird times. The company was supposed to come look at it next week. She said not to worry if I heard anything strange. She also said Mr. Carmichael might come home around 3 to grab something he forgot. She'd never mentioned him coming home early before. I said okay, and she left. I put Oliver down for his nap and sat in the living room with a textbook. I had an exam coming up and I was behind. I kept reading the same page without absorbing anything. At 2:15, the alarm panel in the kitchen started beeping. 3 short beeps. I walked over and looked at the screen. It said, "Side door sensor activated." I looked at the side door that led to the garage. Closed. Locked. I pressed the button to clear the alert, like Mrs. Carmichael had shown me. The beeping stopped. 15 minutes later, it beeped again. Same message. Side door sensor. I checked the door again. Still closed. Still locked. I cleared it and went back to my textbook. At 2:50, it happened a third time. I cleared it and tested the door myself, pulling hard to make sure it was secure. It didn't move at all. I thought about texting Mrs. Carmichael, but she'd already told me the system was glitching. I didn't want to bother her with something she already knew about. I turned the volume down on the panel so it wouldn't wake Oliver. At 3:20, I heard the garage door open. Mr. Carmichael, home like she said he might be. I felt relief flood through me. Another adult in the house. I wouldn't be alone with malfunctioning alarms and weird sounds. The door from the garage to the kitchen was just around the corner from where I was sitting. I heard it open, heard it close, waited for him to walk into the kitchen and say hello. He didn't. I called out his name. No answer. I stood up and walked around the corner. The kitchen was empty. I opened the door to the garage. His car wasn't there. The garage was completely empty. I closed the door and locked it. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. I checked my phone. 3:22. I texted Mrs. Carmichael asking what time Mr. Carmichael was planning to stop by. She texted back immediately. He's not coming home. Change of plans. Why? I stared at her message. I typed back that I thought I heard the garage door. She said it had been opening randomly all week. Part of the same system issue. She apologized for forgetting to warn me. She said, if it happened again, just ignore it. Where are you watching from? And are you watching alone? Subscribe and stay. I went to the front window and looked out. Empty driveway. The garage door was closed. I hadn't heard it close. I checked the monitor. Oliver was still sleeping. I sat back down, but I couldn't focus on anything. I just kept listening. At 4, Oliver woke up screaming. Not his normal cry. A real scream. I ran upstairs and found him standing in his crib, pointing at the corner of his room, the corner where the rocking chair sat. He was screaming and pointing, and his face was bright red. I picked him up and he grabbed onto me so hard his fingernails dug into my neck. I asked what was wrong, but he just kept screaming. I looked at the corner. The rocking chair was moving, just barely, like someone had just stood up from it. I carried Oliver out of the room and took him downstairs. I tried everything. I gave him water. I turned on his show. I held him and rocked him and spoke softly. It took 20 minutes before he calmed down enough to stop screaming. He fell asleep in my arms, exhausted from crying. I didn't move from the couch. I sat there holding him and staring at the stairs. At 4:50, my phone buzzed. Mrs. Carmichael, running late, home at 6 instead of 5:30. Could I stay? I texted yes. At 5:30, I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, walking from Oliver's room toward the master bedroom. I held him tighter and stared at the staircase. At 5:45, I heard the linen closet open, that specific creak of the hinges. I stood up, still holding Oliver, and moved toward the front door. I put my hand on the doorknob. I was ready to leave. At 5:55, I heard the footsteps coming down the stairs, one step at a time, taking their time. They reached the bottom and stopped. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something standing just out of sight in the hallway. Mrs. Carmichael opened the front door at 6 exactly. She was smiling, apologizing for being late. I almost dropped Oliver. She took him from me and asked if I was okay. I said yes. She said I looked pale. I told her I was just tired. She paid me and added extra for staying late. I thanked her and walked to my car on shaking legs. She texted 4 days later, asking if I could work Friday. I stared at the message for an hour. I finally texted back that I'd taken a different job. She said she understood and thanked me for everything. She said Oliver would miss me. I wanted to tell her something was wrong with that house. I wanted to ask if she'd ever heard the footsteps, but I didn't. I just said he was a sweet kid and I wished them well. 6 weeks later, I saw a news article. A family of 3 found dead in their home on Bridgewater Court, the Carmichael Street. Carbon monoxide leak from a cracked heat exchanger. The article said neighbors hadn't seen them in days. It said the alarm system had been going off and nobody thought to check on them. It said the mother, father, and their 14-month-old son died in their sleep, painless, an accident, something that could have been prevented. I read it 5 times. Then I closed my laptop, because I kept thinking about those footsteps, about the rocking chair, about Oliver pointing and screaming at something I couldn't see. And I kept thinking maybe he wasn't screaming at what was there. Maybe he was screaming at what was already happening. The summer I turned 20, I took a last-minute babysitting job through an agency I'd just signed up with. They called me at 11 in the morning and said their regular sitter had canceled and the family needed someone by 5. The address was an hour outside the city, in a town I'd never heard of. The pay was twice my normal rate. I said yes without asking why they were paying so much. The house sat at the end of a long dirt road surrounded by trees. No other houses visible anywhere. The parents met me at the door. The father did all the talking. The mother stood behind him looking at the floor. He said their daughter's name was Anna. She was 8. Easy kid. No problems. Just needed someone to give her dinner and make sure she went to bed by 9. They'd be home by midnight. The mother handed me a folded piece of paper with emergency numbers written in shaky handwriting. She still hadn't looked at me. They left before I could ask any real questions. Anna was sitting at the kitchen table coloring. She looked up when I walked in and said hi. I introduced myself, and she nodded and went back to her picture. I asked if she was hungry. She said not yet. I sat down across from her and looked around. The house was clean but empty feeling. Not much furniture. No pictures on the walls. No books or magazines lying around, just the basics. Like people lived there, but didn't really inhabit the space. At 6, I made the spaghetti her parents had left instructions for. She ate without talking. I tried asking about school. She said it was fine. I asked what she liked to do. She said different things. Her answers were flat, not rude, just empty. After dinner, she went back to coloring and I cleaned the kitchen. At 7:30, I heard a phone ringing somewhere in the house. Not a cell phone. An old landline. Anna didn't react at all. I asked if she heard it. She said, yeah. I asked if she was going to get it. She said, nobody ever answers it. The ringing stopped after 10 rings. I sat back down. At 8, it started again. This time, Anna looked up at me. She said I could answer if I wanted, but I shouldn't. I asked why not. She said because nobody ever talks. It just rings, and if you pick up, they hang up. I asked how she knew. She said it happens every night, same time. I felt uneasy, but I couldn't say why. Wrong number. Spam call. Nothing strange. The ringing stopped. At 8:30, I told Anna it was time to get ready for bed. She put away her crayons and went upstairs. I followed her. Her room was as bare as the rest of the house. A bed, a small dresser, a desk. No posters, no decorations, nothing personal. She got into bed still wearing her clothes. I asked if she needed to brush her teeth or change. She said no. I asked if she needed anything else. She said no. I started to leave, and she said my name. I stopped. She asked if I was going to stay upstairs or go back down. I said downstairs. She said okay. Then she told me to make sure I locked the basement door. I asked why. She said it was her dad's rule. Always lock it at night. I said I would. She rolled over to face the wall. I went downstairs and found the basement door in a little hallway off the kitchen. It was already locked, but I checked it twice. I sat on the couch and pulled out my phone. No signal. I checked the Wi-Fi. The password they'd given me didn't work. I tried it 3 times. Nothing. I was completely cut off. I told myself it was fine. Just a few more hours. I'd had worse jobs than this. At 9:15, the phone started ringing again. I stared at the old cream-colored wall mount in the kitchen. I walked over and picked up the receiver. I didn't say hello. I just listened. Someone was breathing on the other end, slow and steady, not trying to hide it. I asked who it was. The breathing continued. I hung up. My hands were shaking. Prank call. Kids being stupid. I sat back down. At 9:45, the phone rang again, but this time it didn't stop. It just kept going and going. I walked back to the kitchen and stared at it. The sound was drilling into my head. I picked it up. The breathing was louder now, closer to the receiver. I asked what they wanted. The breathing continued for 5 more seconds. Then it stopped. Then a voice whispered, "Check the basement." I slammed the phone down. It rang again immediately. I picked it up and the voice was louder. It said, "Check the basement again." I hung up. It rang again. I didn't answer. It rang 20 times before stopping. I stood in the kitchen trying to control my breathing. Why would someone say that? I looked at the basement door. Still locked. I walked over and pressed my ear against it. Silence. Complete silence. I went back to the living room. I checked the time. 10:05. Less than 2 hours. At 10:30, I heard something upstairs. A door opening. I looked at the ceiling. Footsteps moving across the floor. Anna's room was at the front of the house. These footsteps were coming from the back. I called up asking if Anna was okay. No response. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving toward the stairs. I stood up. I called her name again. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then I heard Anna's voice, small and scared, calling from her room asking who I was talking to. Everything in me went cold. I asked if she was in her room. She said yes. I told her to stay there and lock her door. I heard her get out of bed, heard her door close, heard the lock click. The footsteps started again. Coming down the stairs, I could see the staircase from where I stood. Nobody there, but I heard each step creak under weight. I backed toward the front door. The steps reached the bottom and stopped. The phone rang. I didn't move. It rang and stopped. Then the basement door started rattling, hard. Someone was on the other side pulling on it, testing the lock. I ran to the front door and tried to open it. Deadbolt. I needed a key. I spun around looking for where they'd keep keys. The rattling got harder. I ran to the kitchen and started yanking open drawers. Utensils, dish towels, junk, no keys. The rattling stopped. Total silence. I stood frozen, listening. A slow scraping sound started from behind the basement door. Metal dragging on concrete, getting closer. I looked around for anything I could use. I grabbed a knife from the block on the counter. The scraping stopped. I heard the lock click. I hadn't touched it. The door swung open slowly. The basement was completely black. I couldn't see stairs. Couldn't see anything. Just empty darkness. I backed away. A smell came up from down there. Decay and chemicals. The smell of something dead and wrong. I heard movement. Something shuffling in the dark. I ran to the window and tried to open it. Painted shut. I hit it with my palm. Nothing. I had to get to Anna. I started for the stairs when the phone rang once. Just once. Then stopped. Then the voice came from the basement. Not through the phone. From down in the dark. It said my name. I ran up the stairs without looking back. I got to Anna's door and pounded on it, telling her to open up. She was crying on the other side. She said she couldn't. Her dad said never open the door after 9. Never. For anyone. I told her it was me. She said her dad told her things might pretend, might use voices she knows. I heard something at the bottom of the stairs. That shuffling drag, getting louder. I begged Anna to open the door. She didn't. I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in. I turned off the light and stood with my back against the door, holding the knife. The shuffling came up the stairs. Slow. It moved down the hallway, stopped outside Anna's door. I heard her whimper. The door handle rattled. Then I heard her father's voice, calm, gentle, telling her to open up. Everything was fine. Mom was home early. Anna didn't open it. The voice got sharp, angry. It told her to open the door right now. She started crying harder. The voice stopped. The shuffling moved away from her door, toward the bathroom. It stopped right outside. I held my breath. The handle started turning. I'd locked it. I knew I'd locked it. The handle kept turning anyway. The lock clicked open by itself. The door started pushing inward. I threw my weight against it. It stopped. Something pushed back. Harder. I pushed with everything I had. My feet slid on the tile. The door opened an inch, 2 inches. I saw fingers curl around the edge. Gray. Bloated. Wrong. I screamed and shoved. The door slammed shut. I heard breathing on the other side, then laughing, low and wet. Headlights swept across the bathroom window. A car in the driveway. The thing outside the door went silent. I heard it move away fast. Back down the hall. Down the stairs. The basement door slammed. I heard the front door open. The father's voice calling out that they were home. Normal. Calm. He walked through the downstairs. He came up and knocked on the bathroom door, asking if I was in there. I opened it. He stood in the hall looking concerned, asked if I was all right. I couldn't speak. I just stared. He asked where Anna was. I pointed to her room. He knocked and told her it was safe. She unlocked her door and ran to him crying. He held her and looked at me, asked what happened. I told him everything. The calls, the basement, the thing in the hall. He listened without changing expression. When I finished, he nodded. He said I did good. He said most sitters left after the first call. He pulled out his wallet and handed me $500 cash. He said I earned it. He said they wouldn't need me to come back. I took the money and went downstairs. The mother was in the kitchen. She looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were hollow and exhausted. She said she was sorry. I asked for what? She said for not warning me. Nobody would come if they knew. I asked, knew what? She said the house has rules and you have to follow them or it gets worse. She said they can't leave. They tried. It brings them back. I walked out and got in my car. I didn't stop shaking until I got home an hour later. I never told anyone what happened. I kept the money. Every time I see those bills, I think about Anna's voice through the door. I think about those gray fingers. I think about the mother's empty eyes. And I think about how they're still in that house, still following the rules, still waiting for the next sitter who needs money bad enough not to ask questions. I worked as a live-in nanny for a family 2 hours north of where I grew up, the Danes. They had twin boys, Carter and Elliot, age 5. The job came with my own room, benefits, and a salary that made me ignore how isolated the property was. The nearest house was 15 minutes down the road. Town was 25 minutes. The parents traveled for work constantly, sometimes both of them. Sometimes just one. I'd go weeks alone with just the boys. It was what I signed up for. The boys were bright, polite, well-behaved, easy. I had no complaints for the first 3 months. It started with small things. I'd put the boys to bed at 8 and clean up their play area. Toys would be in different positions the next morning, not scattered like kids had been playing, organized, sorted by type in ways the boys never did on their own. I thought maybe they were waking up early and playing quietly before I got up. I asked them. They said no. I let it go. Then the drawings started appearing. The boys loved to draw. They'd leave papers everywhere. But some of the drawings weren't theirs. Different style, different hand pressure. I found one on the kitchen counter one morning. A stick figure house with 3 people in the window, 2 small figures and 1 tall one standing behind them. The boys said they didn't draw it. I asked if they were sure. They looked at it and shook their heads. A week later, I was doing laundry and found a sweater in the hamper I'd never seen before. Too big for the boys. Adult size, small. Soft blue cotton. I asked if it was from the dress-up bin. They said no. I checked the tag. No brand, no size label. Just a plain sweater. I put it in the donation bag. 2 days later, it was back in the hamper. Dirty again. I started paying attention. A mug in the sink I hadn't used. The TV warm in the morning when I knew I'd turned it off. The boys' door open when I'd closed it the night before. I set up small tests. I'd arrange items on the mantle in a specific pattern. They'd be different by morning. I'd leave a book on the coffee table facing north. It would be facing south the next day. Someone was moving through the house while I slept. I checked every lock and window, all secure. I searched the entire house. Closets, storage, the attic, the shed. Nothing. No signs anyone had broken in. No evidence of anyone hiding. I thought about calling Mrs. Dane, but what would I say? Things are moving, and I don't know why. She'd think the isolation was getting to me. I stayed quiet. I started setting alarms on my phone for random times at night. 2 in the morning, 4:30. I'd get up and walk through the house. Everything always looked normal. It never felt normal. The boys started mentioning Ben. Casual references. Ben showed us a new game. Ben said we should build a fort in the living room. I asked who Ben was. They looked at me like the question was stupid. Their friend. I asked when they met him. They said he'd always been here. I felt my skin prickle. I asked if Ben was pretend. Carter got upset. He said Ben was real. He helped them when I was busy. Elliot nodded. I kept my voice level. Asked what Ben looked like. They said he was tall. He had short hair. He smiled a lot. He wore blue. I asked if Ben was here right now. They said no. He only came at night. After we put them to bed, I felt sick. Asked if they'd been getting out of bed. They said no. Ben came to their room. He'd sit in the chair by the window and tell them stories. I asked what kind of stories. Stories about the house. About the woods outside. About being patient. I asked if Ben ever touched them. They said no. He just sat and talked. He was nice. I called Mrs. Dane that night after the boys were asleep. I told her they had an imaginary friend named Ben. She laughed, said all kids do that. I said this felt different. She asked how. I couldn't explain without sounding unstable. I mentioned the toys moving, the drawings, the sweater. She went quiet. Then she said they'd had a nanny before me. His name was Ben. He'd worked for them for 2 years. The boys loved him. He died in a hiking accident 4 months before they hired me. She said the boys had been devastated. They were probably just missing him. I asked why nobody told me. She said it didn't seem relevant. Ben was gone. The boys needed to move forward. I asked if Ben stayed overnight when they traveled. She said yes. He'd sleep in the guest room, the room I was using. I felt cold spread through my chest. I asked if Ben wore a blue sweater. Mrs. Dane paused. She said she thought so. She said I shouldn't encourage the boys when they talked about Ben. It wasn't healthy. She had to go and hung up. I stood there holding my phone. The boys were asleep upstairs. I thought about Ben sitting in their room, moving their toys, wearing his sweater, watching TV, moving through the house like he still worked here. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on and waited. Nothing happened. The next few weeks the activity increased. Footsteps upstairs when the boys were down with me. Their door closing when they were in the bath. The smell of coffee when I hadn't made any. One morning I found wet footprints from the guest room to the boys' room. Small, barefoot. They faded before reaching their door. I took photos, documented everything. I thought about quitting, but the money was too good and I had rent and loans. I convinced myself I could handle it. Then Elliot got sick. Started as a cold, runny nose, low fever. I kept him home and let him rest. Carter played quietly in the other room. On the third day, Elliot's fever spiked to 104. I gave him medicine and called the pediatrician. They said to watch it and bring him in if it went higher. I sat with him while he slept. His breathing was rough and shallow. I put a cool cloth on his head. I was about to check on Carter when I heard humming. Soft, coming from the boys' room. A melody I didn't recognize. I walked to the doorway. Elliot was still asleep. The humming was coming from the corner where the chair sat. The empty chair. I stood there listening. The voice was low, male, gentle. The humming continued for another minute. Elliot's breathing eased. His face relaxed. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the fever broke. The humming faded and stopped. I backed out slowly. I found Carter in the playroom. Asked if he heard humming. He said yes. Ben was helping Elliot feel better. I asked if Ben helped when Carter was sick. He said yes. Ben always helped when they needed him. I knelt down eye level with Carter. Asked if Ben ever wanted them to do things. Carter shook his head. Ben just took care of them. Asked if Ben ever seemed mad. Carter looked confused. No, Ben loved them. That night I couldn't stay in the guest room. I slept on the couch. At 3 a.m, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I sat up. A shadow moved past the doorway. Tall, thin, male shape. I didn't move, didn't breathe. It went upstairs. I heard the boy's door open quietly, soft footsteps, then nothing. I waited 15 minutes before I could make myself move. I crept upstairs and looked in their room. Both boys asleep. The room empty. But the air felt different, warmer, safer. I stayed 2 more months. The activity never stopped, but it never got worse. Ben, or whatever it was, seemed content to just exist alongside us, moving things, watching the boys, maintaining his presence. The boys were happy, healthy, better adjusted than most kids I'd worked with. I started wondering if I was the problem, if I was disrupting something that worked. Mr. Dane called one night and said their schedules were changing. They'd be home more, wouldn't need live-in help. They'd keep me part-time if I wanted. I said I'd think about it. That night I packed. I left the blue sweater folded on the bed. I wrote the boys a note saying I had to go, but I'd miss them. I left before sunrise. I didn't say goodbye to Ben. I didn't need to. I knew he'd still be there. I got a job at a daycare back in the city. Regular hours. Lots of people. I never took another live-in position. The Danes sent a holiday card that year. A photo of the family, the boys smiling in front of the house. I looked at it for a long time before I threw it away, because if you looked close at the window behind them in the boys' room, you could see a shape, tall, male, blue clothing, still there, still watching, still taking care of them. I think about it late at night when I can't sleep. I think about needing someone so badly they can't leave, even after they die. I think about love that doesn't stop when your heart does. And I think about those boys growing up in that house with something that will never leave them, never change, never stop protecting them. I don't know if that's good or bad. I just know I couldn't stay and watch. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more stories.